It's such a clever, extraordinary, sophisticated machine. Completely shocking.
Some objects don't fit, not because they're fake or the dating is wrong, but because they exist at all.
This is an amazing experiment. It will prove whether or not the ancient people had knowledge of flight. And if they did, the implications are staggering.
Artifacts so technically precise, so structurally impossible for their claimed era, that the academic response wasn't investigation. It was suppression.
It is a battery, everybody agrees with that, but nobody knows why they made it and how they made it. What mind would think of that?
These aren't fringe legends. Several sit in museums right now, labeled, catalogued, and quietly off limits. So what exactly are scientists trying to avoid? These are the banned artifacts scientists have instructed people not to study. And the historical photos behind them reveal exactly why.
What is an UPA part? So you've seen the photos. The artifacts sealed behind glass, locked in basement vaults, quietly pulled from exhibition floors, and you've probably wondered why. The real question is, what exactly qualifies an object as something scientists would rather you never examine too closely? The term is UPArt, out-of-place artifact. Coined by American naturalist Ivan T. Sanderson, it describes any archaeological or paleontological object whose existence in a particular context appears to directly contradict the accepted timeline of human history. Think of it like finding a smartphone buried inside a medieval cathedral wall. The object itself isn't impossible, but its location makes every assumption around it suddenly unstable. That instability is precisely why mainstream science resists them. Historians and archaeologists almost universally avoid the term, leaving it to fringe communities. Because if even one UPArt proves genuine, the established chronology doesn't just bend, it fractures. Those are the actual stakes, and one artifact nearly broke everything wide open: the Antikythera shock. So here is where the story stops being theoretical. Every framework needs a stress test. A single case so well documented, so physically undeniable, that dismissing it becomes professionally embarrassing. The Antikythera mechanism is that case, and what happened to it tells you almost everything about how science handles an object that shouldn't exist. In 1901, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera hauled up fragments from a Roman-era shipwreck sitting roughly 45 meters below the surface. Among the corroded bronze and marble statuary was something that looked, at first glance, like a lump of calcified rock. It sat in the Athens National Archaeological Museum for 2 years before anyone realized it had moving parts inside. What researchers eventually found, after decades of X-ray imaging, tomography scanning, and painstaking analysis, were at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precision cut with teeth so uniform they implied a manufacturing tradition entirely absent from every other artifact recovered from that era. The device tracked lunar cycles, predicted solar eclipses, and modeled planetary positions. It was, functionally, an analog astronomical computer, dated to somewhere between 87 and 25 BCE. Now here is the problem that nearly broke the timeline completely. Accepted scholarship had placed the first geared clockwork mechanisms using interconnected toothed wheels driven by weights, toward the close of the 10th century AD. That is not a minor discrepancy. That gap is over 1,000 years. Imagine discovering a working jet engine in a medieval blacksmith's workshop. Same category of impossibility. The initial institutional instinct was exactly what Chapter 1 predicted. Treat it as an anomaly, file it away, avoid drawing conclusions. But the Antikythera mechanism refused to cooperate with that strategy. Physical evidence is stubborn. More imaging, more gear counts, more peer-reviewed analysis, and mainstream archaeology eventually did something remarkable. It reversed course entirely. The mechanism is now accepted as genuine, the most sophisticated geared device from the ancient world, unmatched until the medieval period. One artifact, over a millennium rewritten, validated, not suppressed. Which makes the next object far more interesting, because it was never given that same institutional grace. Baghdad's hidden voltage. Discovered in 1936 near Kujat Rabu, outside modern Baghdad, the object is deceptively simple. A clay jar roughly the size of a large coffee mug, containing a copper cylinder wrapped around an iron rod, the whole assembly sealed with bitumen. Unremarkable at first glance. Then German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig examined it in 1938 and made a claim that the archaeological community has been arguing about ever since. This was a galvanic cell, a working battery, built somewhere between 150 BCE and 650 CE, potentially beating Alessandro Volta's 1800 invention by nearly 2,000 years. And here's what makes that claim genuinely interesting rather than merely dramatic. Replicas do produce a voltage. Small, weak, but measurable. Electrochemical reaction confirmed. But what the artifact actually lacks is everything that would make the battery theory coherent: wiring, circuit evidence, any associated technology that could use a current, any ancient text describing electrical application. Contemporaneous gilding records that reference electroplating, which is the fringe community's favorite proposed function, simply do not exist, while ample documentation covers every other metalworking technique from the same period. Occam's razor, applied without sentiment, lands somewhere far less dramatic. Storage jars structurally identical to this one have been excavated across the same region in abundance, used for preserving sacred scrolls. A scroll container. Probably not the headline anyone wanted. And yet the battery theory persists loudly, while the scroll jar explanation sits quietly in the literature, which raises a different question entirely about what gets amplified, what gets shelved, and who decides. Stone Age precision. So here is where it gets genuinely strange. The Baghdad battery at least had a physical mechanism you could point to. Chemistry, current, cause and effect. Disputable, certainly, but structured. What comes next is different. These are artifacts where the problem isn't a missing explanation, it's a missing permission slip to even look for one. The Saqqara bird is a small carved wooden object, roughly palm-sized, pulled from an Egyptian tomb dating to around 200 BCE. Shaped with a vertical tail fin, a feature found on no known bird species, but on virtually every modern aircraft. It generated serious aerodynamic interest when aviation engineer Khalil Messiha examined it in 1969 and suggested it was a functional glider model. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities responded with bureaucratic silence. Recatalogued, reshelved, filed under decorative objects where it quietly remains. The Dendera reliefs, carved into a temple wall in Upper Egypt, show elongated bulb-shaped figures with what some researchers describe as internal filament structures. Imagery strikingly similar to a glass discharge tube, which is either profound or the most elaborate case of architectural pareidolia in recorded history. Egyptologists categorize them as standard religious iconography. Investigation closed before it opened. What makes the Piri-Reis map the sharpest edge in this conversation is specificity. Drawn in 1513, it depicts the Antarctic coastline, a landmass not officially discovered until 1818, with coastal detail that reportedly matches subglacial terrain charted by modern seismic surveys. When Charles Hapgood presented this to the Library of Congress in the 1950s, the institutional response was polite, thorough, and ultimately dismissive. His findings were filed. The map stayed in the archive. 3 artifacts, 3 institutions, 1 consistent instruction, stop there. Which raises the uncomfortable question of what happens when the thing you're told not to study turns out to be a person. Forbidden human origins. In 1889, workers drilling a water well near Nampa, Idaho, pulled up a small clay figurine from roughly 90 meters below the surface. The layer it came from, established by independent geological surveys, dated to somewhere between 2 and 12 million years old. The figurine itself shows clear humanoid form, recognizable torso, limbs, proportional craftsmanship. The Smithsonian examined it. Geologist George Frederick Wright documented the stratigraphy carefully and published his findings. Then, with almost choreographed efficiency, the academic consensus shifted from investigation to dismissal. Contamination during drilling was suggested, though never demonstrated with physical evidence. The figurine exists. The dismissal exists. The actual proof of contamination does not. Now, consider what stratigraphy actually means. Think of it like reading tree rings. Each geological layer represents a fixed, measurable window of time, laid down in sequence. When an artifact emerges from a sealed, undisturbed layer, that layer is its timestamp. Disputing it demands physical counter-evidence, not institutional preference. Which brings us to the pre-Clovis footprints. For decades, the Clovis first model held that humans entered the Americas roughly 13,000 years ago. Then fossilized footprints began surfacing at multiple sites in Chile, Mexico, and White Sands, New Mexico, embedded in strata independently dated between 21,000 and 23,000 years before the present. Researchers who pushed for formal excavation and wider peer review met resistance that was less scientific than procedural. Funding dried up, institutional access narrowed. Here's what makes this pattern uncomfortable. The suppression mechanism never needed to be a conspiracy. Peer review requires consensus. Funding requires institutional approval. Careers depend on not contradicting the framework that trained you. The Nampa figurine sits in a museum. The footprints are photographed and largely unexcavated. And none of that is an accident. But human remains are still biological. What's next is harder to explain away because it's metal, it's grooved, and it has no business existing at all. Metal that shouldn't exist. In 1885, workers at a foundry in Wolfsegg am Traunfall, Austria, split open a block of tertiary lignite, coal deposits laid down roughly 20 to 60 million years ago, and found something inside that had no right being there. A roughly rectangular iron object, weighing approximately 785 grams, with clearly defined edges, a machined-looking surface, and a groove running around its circumference. Grooves don't form spontaneously in iron. That's not how geology works. It was dense, symmetrical, and geometrically precise in a way that erosion and pressure simply don't produce. Now, the obvious question, who made it? Investigators offered a tidy answer. Meteoritic iron, naturally formed, geologically deposited. Neat. Except meteorites don't typically arrive pre-grooved with circumferential channels. The reclassification happened quickly, and without the kind of exhaustive metallurgical investigation you'd expect from a find. This extraordinary. The Wolfsegg iron sits in a museum in Salzburg, studied only superficially, its manufacturing origin officially unresolved. But what really makes this alarming is that Wolfsegg isn't alone. South Africa. Pre-Cambrian pyrophyllite deposits dating back 2.8 billion years. Miners extracting stone have repeatedly unearthed small metallic spheres, the Klerksdorp spheres, with near-perfect roundness and finely carved parallel grooves running around their middles. Billions of years before multicellular life existed on this planet, geologists classified them as natural limonite and wollastonite concretions. Possible. Concretions can form under pressure. But concretions with precise, repeated, equatorial grooves, that specificity quietly goes unaddressed. Both objects were reclassified. Neither received the systematic metallurgical investigation their anomalous geometry demanded. And that pattern, reclassify, shelve, move on, turns out to have a very deliberate playbook behind it. The suppression playbook. So far, we've watched individual artifacts get quietly reclassified. The Wolfsegg iron relabeled. The Klerksdorp spheres filed under natural concretion. Each case handled separately, as though the decision were isolated, reluctant, purely scientific. But what if it wasn't isolated at all? What if there's a template? Because when you map the institutional responses to anomalous finds across 120 years, a remarkably consistent sequence emerges. Think of it like a corporate crisis protocol. The moment something threatening arrives, the same steps activate in the same order, producing the same outcome. Step 1. Acquisition without announcement. The Smithsonian Institution, between the 1880s and early 1900s, received thousands of skeletal remains and associated artifacts from excavation sites across North America. Many were logged internally but never entered the public catalog. A 2014 investigative report by the American Institution of Alternative Archaeology alleged that over 17,000 giant humanoid skeletal specimens were received and subsequently shelved without published analysis. The Smithsonian has disputed this framing, but the absence of public records for numerous documented acquisitions is itself a documented fact, not a fringe assertion. Step 2. Relocation below the access line. Museums operate on a simple spatial hierarchy: displayed, stored, archived. Most people assume archived means catalogued and available to researchers. It frequently does not. The British Museum, the Field Museum in Chicago, and the Peabody at Harvard have all faced documented criticism from academic archaeologists for holding anomalous specimens in basement collections with restricted or entirely suspended access, sometimes for decades. When you cannot study an object, you cannot publish findings on it. When findings aren't published, the object effectively does not exist in the scientific record. Step 3. Journal gatekeeping. The peer review system is science's immune response to bad ideas, which is mostly a feature, not a flaw. But it also means that a paper proposing an anomalous artifact deserves metallurgical reinvestigation, gets rejected not on methodological grounds, but because its premise conflicts with established chronology. That's the immune system attacking healthy tissue. Scientists would prefer a different metaphor. but the mechanism is identical. The pattern isn't conspiracy, it's institutional momentum. Self-reinforcing, assumption-protecting, genuinely difficult to distinguish from fraud unless you're looking from outside. And occasionally from outside is exactly where the reversal begins. But here's what the suppression playbook couldn't account for. Sometimes the evidence becomes too large, too replicated, and too witnessed to be quietly relocated to a basement. 3 cases broke the institutional wall entirely, and the reversals weren't graceful. The Antikythera mechanism took decades of accumulating analysis, X-ray imaging, fresh dives, computational modeling, before mainstream archaeology formally conceded that geared precision engineering existed over a millennium earlier than anyone had allowed on the official timeline. The concession, when it finally came, wasn't announced with fanfare. It simply became accepted fact, slipped into textbooks without acknowledgement that the same object had been treated as an embarrassing anomaly for years. Then Monteverde, Chile. Archaeologists led by Tom Dillahay uncovered a human settlement site dated to approximately 14,800 years before present, roughly 1,300 years before the Clovis first model permitted humans to exist anywhere in the Americas. The Smithsonian, the same institution implicated repeatedly in the suppression patterns described earlier, sent a formal review team to the site in 1997. Their conclusion: the evidence was valid. Pre-Clovis human presence in the Americas was real. Decades of resistant gatekeeping collapsed in a single site visit. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey delivered perhaps the most disorienting reversal of all. A complex of massive carved stone pillars, deliberately constructed, dating to roughly 12,000 years ago, a full 7,000 years before the accepted timeline placed organized civilization anywhere on Earth. Hunter-gatherers weren't supposed to build temples. Nobody sent them the memo. The site forced a fundamental rewrite of when human beings became architecturally and socially complex. All 3 cases share one mechanism: persistent, documented, physical evidence replicated across independent teams, eventually outlasted institutional resistance. Suppression, it turns out, has a shelf life. The question is, what happens to the artifacts still waiting for theirs to expire, still locked away? So the reversals happened, 3 of them, all documented, all eventually undeniable. But here's the uncomfortable arithmetic. For every artifact that outlasted its suppression, others are still sitting in the dark. The Lanzhou stone is the clearest current example. Discovered in China's Gansu province in 2002, it is an oddly shaped rock, roughly the size and weight of a hand tool, with what appears to be a precisely threaded metal bar running through its interior. Not embedded loosely, running through it. The surrounding matrix dates the stone to hundreds of millions of years ago. And what institutional analysis has been formally published since discovery? None that any peer-reviewed body has formally claimed. That absence could mean investigators quietly confirmed it as a natural geological curiosity and moved on without fanfare. It could also mean the paperwork is sitting in a drawer, waiting for a funding cycle that never arrives. Both explanations are technically possible. Only one has been publicly offered. Beyond Lanzhou, named museum vaults, including holdings in the British Natural History Archive and provincial Chinese depositories, contain catalogued UOP arts with no scheduled review dates, no assigned research teams, and no public access timelines. What makes that genuinely unsettling is not conspiracy. It is bureaucratic inertia applied to objects that may actually matter. Göbekli Tepe sat unexcavated beneath a field for decades before anyone looked properly. The question is not whether something is locked away. The question is what it would force us to rewrite when someone finally opens the door. The question was never whether these objects existed. It's why our frameworks keep failing to explain them. Every mission into the past, whether a deep-sea excavation or a desert dig, risks turning up another Antikythera. The funding rarely follows. But the ground hasn't run out of surprises yet. What artifact shook you most? Tell us below.